Welcome to today's edition of Gibson's Caring Corner. Creighton, we're going to have some fun with today's program. Pet ownership. Is that for you?
Could be. Did you know that 70% of senior animal owners say that their pets is a factor of deciding where they will age?
Interesting. And what are some of the qualities of benefits of owning a pet and having a pet around?
Well, I'm going to share a little bit more with you before we get to that.
Okay.
So, in fact, 55% of seniors interact with a pet at a family member's home. So we're going to check out the ways of getting pet benefits without owning the pet.
Wonderful. You know, I've heard that having a pet could even lower your blood pressure. Is that true?
That's what I've heard.
Well, we have a beautiful pet, well, several of them. Bentley. He gets to come to the office every day, and I would say, you know, our team is not the typical aging senior, but I do feel that the joy that he provides to the office environment, they enjoy having him pop in.
Lifts up their spirits.
It does. We can only handle him about a half a day. We have to let work get serious by the afternoon. But Elijah walks Bentley on a regular basis, and we enjoy getting to see and hear about their walking adventures. So, yeah, that's a benefit of health as well, even walking a dog. But why or why not can someone benefit from owning a pet?
So one of the first things is visit a cat or dog cafe.
Can you believe there are such things? We were in Charleston, South Carolina a few years ago, and there was actually a business, and all it was cats. And they were just running all over the front of the window, and people would walk in and pay to pet an animal, a cat.
Get a cup of coffee and pet the animal.
Yep, that's what it was. Yeah, we're in a small city, so we're not at that stage yet, but who knows? Maybe one day there's going to be a cat and dog cafe where you're going to come in and you're going to pet the animals and enjoy your cup of joe.
Yep. So the next one would be just hang out at a dog park.
You mean like people watch?
Sure.
But maybe it should be like dog watch. So there's a lot of times, you know, you'll go, oh, I'm just going to go watch all these people walking around the park and stuff. And people will sit on the benches and do that. But, you know, you could go to where the dogs and people are walking their pets. And who knows? Maybe they would allow you to pet their animal. And then you get the benefits of enjoying petting the animal, lowering your blood pressure, but they're really not yours. It's kind of like grandkids. You get to enjoy and love on them.
Spoil them and send them home.
And send them home. There you go.
So the next one is foster pets until they're adopted.
Yeah, there are rescue organizations like Rescue Ranch, and they take in animals that need a home. And sometimes they're sick, but people house them until they get better. You know, recently, the director, Michelle at Rescue Ranch, she had, I believe it was baby goats, and she was looking for people to come feed them early in the morning and late at night, and that it was what they needed to get well. But rescue organizations is also a great way that you could benefit by serving with animals.
Yeah. Volunteer at a rescue organization or animal shelter or zoo.
So let's talk about what that volunteer work might look like. You may enjoy it, you may not. So volunteer work at these organizations could include, you know, they have snakes at some too. So, you know, that might be intimidating to some. But cleaning cages, you know, rabbits, goats, whatever, enclosures, feeding the animals, watering the animals, restocking supplies, washing dishes, walking dogs, or socializing with the animals. There's lots of jobs, and some of them may not be clean, but they could still be enjoyable.
Yeah. So the next thing is get to know your neighbor's pets.
Well, we're new in our neighborhood, and so about 6 months ago, my dog, Bentley, gets out. And he not only gets out, he is loving being out and starts to visit all neighbors. Yeah. And the neighbor that he wanted to go to the most was the one that had the biggest dogs that were in fences. So he is down there having the time of his life, bouncing back and forth, barking at the dogs, while I am trying to bounce back and forth and catch him. It was a sight to behold. I did finally have success, but I had to trick him into it. But getting to know the neighbors is important. But, getting to know them and actually maybe walk your dog with them. So you can get to know people that way and have your animal meet their animals and hopefully get along well.
Sure. So the next one, connect with a therapy animal.
If your loved one is in a care community, they may already have a therapy animal. But great, we had an experience some years back to where you had to give radiation. And where we went to a major medical center, they did have therapy animals in there. Some people were going through really severe radiation therapies, and they were able to pet, I think they had dogs, pet dogs that were there, and it just helps relieve the anxiety because it's serious stuff whenever you're dealing with cancer at some levels. And that is just a welcoming thing whenever you can relieve that anxiety whenever you're going through those circumstances.
Yep. So the last thing I've got for the day is visit a pet store.
Well, there's all types of animals in the pet store. So I got to share, I love sharing a story. So I'm going to share a story about whenever my mother bought me a fish. So I was a little girl. We lived in Troutman, and we had just moved from having a house with a well to a house with city water. And my mother bought me a goldfish. So we got the pretty tank and the blue pebbles and, poured the water into the tank, and then we carefully, slowly poured the bag with the fish in it into the tank. And what do you know? The fish jumps straight out of the water, falls down on the table, and dies. Well, I learned that you cannot put a goldfish in city water. It just isn't healthy for their systems. His little gills were gone. So anyway, that was the end of that goldfish story. But visiting a pet store, you could go in there, you could possibly pet a pet, and you don't have to take them home and actually get some health benefits from just visiting the pet store.
Very good.
So
where can they go to?
So to find out more of how to take advantage of pet ownerships when it may not be for you, and other ideas how you can utilize other people's pets, go to petsandseniors.com. Again, that is petsandseniors.com. Thank you for joining us today on Gibson's Caring Corner.
Hi, welcome back to Health Tips with Cale, your exercise science, health, and fitness enthusiast. So today I want to pick up where we left off in the carbohydrates series that we just started, part 2. I want to really answer the question of why do we need carbohydrates? So by answering that question, I want to talk more about the roles of carbohydrates in the body. So from the book Human Nutrition Deprecated by the University of Hawaii, they say there are 5 primary reasons why we need carbohydrates. One is for energy production, energy storage, building macromolecules, sparing proteins, and also helping with fat metabolism. And so I kind of want to go over these essentially overall. But first off, last episode we talked about what are carbohydrates. So we talked about sugar, we talked about starch and fiber, and how each of those are found in different foods. And so overall, we know that carbohydrates mainly play a role in energy production, like we just stated. And so sugar is by far maybe the most easiest source that our body can use to convert sugar into glucose, which then converts into energy. But there's a whole long process of that, which I won't get into. I won't bore you by another biology class or anything. I know we've all sat through one of those once or twice, right? So I want to pick up with the energy production, which would be I want to pick up with energy production, which is probably the most common thing that we know about carbohydrates, whether it's sugar or whether it's the starches. So for energy production, the primary role, I would say the primary role of carbohydrates is to provide the body with that energy that it needs to go from day-to-day activities. It also helps with your red blood cells, which surprisingly, your red blood cells are only able to really take glucose that are broken down from that carbohydrate, which to me kind of seems a little skeptical because glucose should be glucose, right? Well, there's some variations in that apparently with the fatty acids and then also with your glucose or with the carbohydrates. And then your brain and nervous system, that actually prefers carbohydrates or sugars and starches like that over fatty acids. It can, if it needs to, convert to ketones, which is what your body starts using as energy whenever you're actually starting to starve off from carbohydrates. But we'll get into more in a later episode. So from energy production, we also have energy storage, because what's the point of being able to use energy if you can't also store it for later purpose when you might be starving? So energy storage, that's normally found when your body will take glucose or take a carbohydrates, break it down to glucose, and it will recombine it into a nice long chain of glucose molecules again. So if you go back to that thought process of taking that one granular sugar cube and then combining it with multiple sugar granules, then that's kind of what it does with glucose. So with that, that just kind of helps to give your body enough energy for later purposes. Maybe you don't have rights to food, or you don't have access to food right away, and maybe you just need that extra boost to get you throughout that day. This can be stored as glycogen in the muscles and liver. So surprisingly, 25% of stored glucose or glycogen is kept in the liver, and that's actually there to kind of help you with maintaining your blood glucose levels. Everything else would be stored mostly into the muscles. And surprisingly, the body can store up to 4,000 calories worth of energy without ever needing to be used. And no, don't worry, this won't be stored as fat. So you don't have to worry about getting overly fat with that, unless we do obviously eat too much. But that's another topic for another day. The next thing is helping with building macromolecules. So glucose is used for building things, or really kind of adding into the sugars for your DNA, which helps with, well, pretty much everything. Your body wouldn't be able to function without the DNA it needed. You wouldn't have the fingers that you needed if it wasn't for that specific DNA in those cells. So your DNA is just the coding of each individual cell, and so glucose, or the carbohydrates that make up that glucose, really kind of help to form that sugary bond that's needed to define those certain cells. Then you also have your RNA. Your RNA is really there to convert from DNA to the proteins that it needs. And so it's really kind of a messenger between the two, from DNA, from the coding mechanism to the protein mechanism that it's there for. And then we also have ATP. ATP is then, it's really kind of the most basic form of energy that our cells use. So in a way, we go from glucose, or we go from carbohydrates to glucose, and then back down to ATP. And that's kind of really the most basic way to describe the whole breakdown of carbohydrates into energy for our body. And so our cells, every cell in our body will then go to use ATP as a source of energy. From there, it also helps with building NADPH. Okay, well, what's that? Well, that's just a big fancy chemistry term. You don't need to really worry too much about what exactly it is at this moment. But I will tell you that NADPH helps fight against oxidative stress. So when you're overly stressed about things, NADPH will actually help with that. It will also help with other chemical reactions in the body to help keep you alive, whether it's producing more energy or there's so many more, but we'll talk about that hopefully at a later time too. And then if your body creates energy and then it has the energy storage and then it has all the building blocks that it needs, the excess glucose would then be stored as fat, which then your body will now have to take extra work to break down that fat, which kind of goes into our next things, which is sparing proteins and then also lipid metabolism or fat metabolism. And so let's go more into the fat metabolism first. So we know that if our carbohydrates are used for energy, If all of our energy storages are full and we have all the macromolecules that we need, and then it's now stored as fat, well, that's not really good, because now we start to build fat in the places that we really don't want to. Maybe now we go from the good weight that we need to be to maybe being a little bit overweight or essentially obese, and that can really cause some other health implications. And so having too high of blood glucose levels can actually inhibit your body or stop your body from breaking down the fat that it needs to maintain at a healthy weight. And so also not having enough carbohydrates can also make your body go into more of a lipid or fat burning mechanism too, which can also be good if you are overweight or if you have excess fat that you need to burn, but it can also be a bad thing when you don't have those excess storage to really burn off. And then so sparing proteins. Well, if we don't have enough carbohydrates, then the other things that our body uses to get the energy that it needs is through proteins, which is the muscle that are on our bones to help us lift things over our heads, or to help us walk, or to help us stabilize ourselves, to make sure we don't fall, and also the fats that we just talked about. So if we don't have the necessary carbohydrates, whether it's the sugar, the simple sugars that are found in fruit, milk, or the starches found in potatoes or your vegetables, then our body starts to convert everything to its basic form, and it will break down whatever it can to get there. But so taking carbohydrates in moderation is at best. But we should really try to aim for that about 45 to 60% of our overall diet to try and help with keeping our body where it needs to be. That way we don't break down excess proteins or muscle that we need, or we don't start losing too much fat too quickly that we actually do need, because some fat is actually still good for you. And so thank you for joining today on Health Tips with Cale.
It is story time. Let's go back through time. This is the stories of Elizabeth Ann Rinehardt Gibson. Just to recap, last week we were talking about where she had a hole in her dress. It had eaten out the whole bottom of her dress, sulfuric acid. And so the teacher was telling her to get up, and she was refusing to get up. All right, so that's where we're back into the story. All right, so the teacher, she went to the cloakroom and found a jacket, brought it to me, and we tied the sleeves around my waist, letting the coat make a skirt in the back, and got me out of that class, only to find I had to face Jack Scott, our principal, who always looked as if he had stepped out of a bandbox, with creases in his pants that looked like knives, shoes shined so you could see yourself. Mrs. Sigmund told Mr. Scott what had happened to me in the chemistry lab, and that man, who never smiled, was bent double, laughing so loud and so hard you couldn't believe it. He asked if I had to drive the school bus that evening, and I told him yes. Jerry Swing, a senior, walked by, and Mr. Scott threw him his car keys and said, "Please take Ann home to change clothes." Jerry Swing was a football player and a senior who did not know me. His taking me home was outrageous. I was so embarrassed for him to see where I lived in an old log house out in the country. He was a city boy. I never lived down the sitting in acid with school. Back to being younger, like 10 or 12, and Mr. Whitlow came by to get Dad to go fishing with him. His daughter Connie was with him. She was his youngest, and she did whatever she pleased, and she begged Dad to allow me to go with them. Reluctantly, Dad said, "Run, get your jacket, and tell your mother you're going with me." I was shocked, to put it mildly, for Dad only going to go fishing occasionally and surely didn't want to have me along. Connie and I were pretty good kids playing in mud pies and watching our daddies fish. There was a large poplar tree that fell into the edge of High Rock Lake. Connie and I decided we would walk up and down the tree trunk. We got way out in the water and fell in at 3 o'clock in the morning. We got out, and they're absolutely freezing to death. My dad just sat right on fishing, while good old Mr. Whitlow stopped and built us a fire and cooked up hot coffee, eggs, sausage, and toast. That must have been the best food ever prepared. The next day, we got in our yard and were going across the front porch. My dad said, "Now, Ann, I don't care who comes by to go fishing. Don't ask because you can't go again." I never did. So I remember being a small child having to walk by the frog pond on Highway 150. At the end of our road, it was a notorious night spot where everything went on. Granddad owned it and rented it to anyone who paid well. Once some gypsies were at the night spot and they really made up to him, taking his money, which was in $100 bills and a lot of money. Needless to say, he sure was mad. Granddad was a sensible little man most times, but not in that situation. He always said, "Keep everything you have for 7 years, and if you haven't used it, keep it 7 more years." He was an expert at keeping everything he had. Never throw anything away. One memory I have is of winter nights. Standing in front of the fireplace, he would be sitting by the fire and reach over with bare feet and pinch the daylights out of our legs as we were getting warm. Granddad would sit in the barn door and whittle as cornstalk articles and whistles. He always had a big chew of tobacco in his mouth, as did Dad. They both looked abnormal without their jaws completely full. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's edition of Storytime with Ann Rinehardt Gibson.
Thank you for watching Caring Corner. Make sure you head over to our Facebook and YouTube channel where you will find this program along with others. Be sure that you subscribe, like, and click the notification bell so that you will receive notifications for our weekly program. Don't forget to share this program to your social media platforms. If there's a question that you would like to ask, make sure to email it to caringcorner22@gmail.com. We hope to see you on the next episode of Caring Corner.